Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to, well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello and welcome to the podcast. It is always such a privilege and a joy to have your company. Today's conversation is going to be so interesting. I can't wait to get started. Given the high co-occurrence of autism and anxiety, we're going to be spending some time talking to Dr. Stacey Rabba today to talk about the process of diagnosis, to talk about autism, and to learn more about how families can approach supporting their children. And I think this is the kind of episode that's really going to make a difference for you if you're in an educational setting as well. And so Dr. Stacey Rabba is a developmental psychologist. She's joining us from Melbourne, my home city. Monash University is where she is based. And Stacey, I'd love you to share with our listeners kind of what it is that you do professionally now and kind of what's led you to the role that you play in research and with families in the area of autism.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you so much for welcoming me on this podcast. And I think it's so great that we're talking about autism in the context of anxiety. So my background is as a developmental psychologist, and I've been working in the space now of neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism for over 15 years. And really been looking at autism across the lifespan. So a lot of my earlier work started in the very young years, and I've worked in adolescence and now right through to adulthood. And I'm really passionate about translating the research into practice. So I would say looking at the work that we're doing is trying to bridge that gap and ensuring that what we're doing in that research context is actually helpful on the ground to families and to individuals and autistic individuals themselves. So I'm quite keen on improving quality of life and ensuring that well-being is optimized from a strengths-based angle. So just looking at how do we utilize the strengths and the resources that families already have to ensure that their life is as meaningful and as optimal as they would like it to be. I also work in a clinical capacity at Monash Health, which is Victoria's largest public health service, and I lead an adult autism service there. So that's really working with autistic adults and individuals who perhaps have been either misdiagnosed or have not been diagnosed, and supporting that process. And all of the work that I do really takes that family systems approach and family wellbeing approach, so that really we're looking at how we can continue to build respectful, compassionate care in our health professionals when we're looking at autistic people and supporting autistic people and their families.
Oh, thank you for giving us that insight into the work you do. And I love that you were talking about bridging the gap, because it's so often, isn't it, that it's bringing the science, what is studied and understood, and from an analytical point of view, and translating those findings, isn't it, into real world supports, understandings, skills, whatever it is that people need. And often that can take a very, very long time. Often that can take over a decade for something that's happening in a lab or happening in a university from a research standpoint to actually making a difference and bringing those findings to people to actually impact and improve the quality of their life. So I always love chatting to people just like you, because I really care deeply about science and about accuracy and about supporting people, and for this to be a trusted place to get information, but also to have some practical ideas. And I love the way you talk about autism as well. How has our understanding and the way that we talk about autism shifted over time? Because there's definitely been a shift, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I've been in this space now for over 15 years, and probably 15 years ago, we would have had a very different type of language. And now we're fortunate enough to be looking at more of the strengths focus. So thinking about autism in the context of development generally, and thinking about how it's a variation in development. It's a neurotype. It's a different way of thinking, rather than kind of looking at it in a sort of abnormal or atypical or wrong way of thinking,
yes,
which historically there's been that kind of negative connotation. So I feel very fortunate to have been part of that kind of journey from both a clinical standpoint and a research perspective, and seeing the shift that's made in families' lives and individuals' lives. So, yeah, I think it's great that we're moving to more of a neurodiversity affirming shift.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I was talking to you off air and talking about, as a parent, when we've got our children, we're raising them and we're comparing them and looking at how they're meeting their developmental milestones compared to the children in our mother's group or our friends' children. And the classic kind of thinking is, when your child is doing something different, is kind of, well, what's wrong? And that's kind of can be an instinctive kind of like thought process, whereas we are now talking more about, well, what's different, and understanding that. And we're all so different. And as you say, autism is a different way of thinking. It's a neurotype. And so it's brilliant that we're coming to it from a strengths-based perspective and that we are having this conversation now. And I love that we can bring this information and share your expertise with the listeners today, because there's so much to talk about. And I wanted to start really by, I guess, understanding the process of a diagnosis, because we know that a parent might notice a difference or a change and maybe be curious, and the first step might be to perhaps go and have a chat to their general practitioner, maybe chat with friends and family and do a little bit of online or desktop research. But if you could kind of talk us through from those very early stages of noticing a difference, what is that process like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we know is that the process of obtaining an autism diagnosis is complex. And even the experience of navigating the different services is also quite complex, and it places a lot of demands on parents themselves to be able to find the resources, to find access to services. And generally referrals do come from GPs. So that's the first point of call. Yeah. We know that GPs will generally then refer to developmental pediatricians and other allied health clinicians, such as developmental psychologists. That's generally the starting point. One of the other things that we're really fortunate about here in Australia is that in Victoria specifically, maternal and child health nurses have been trained to identify early signs of autism at key visits, so at 12 months, 18 months and 24 months. And when they notice some of these early signs, the nurses, they can also refer on to paediatricians and other health professionals. That's been a really key factor when we're thinking about how we screen children in those early years and how we ensure children get the best start in life. We're starting to see more of those shifts where parents are raising concerns and starting to kind of move into those spaces, but also when they're not raising the concerns themselves, that there are health professionals like maternal child health nurses at the forefront who are trained and can identify these early signs.
Has there in the past been a gap between kind of onset of early noticeable change and diagnosis? I imagine it's been years. I imagine it is years. Yeah. Can you speak a bit to that gap and what families might be able to do to minimise the gap when it comes to the process of diagnosis? Because like anything, the earlier we understand what's happening, the sooner we can put into place the strategies and have the understanding that helps everybody to thrive, the whole family to thrive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. What we know from this space is that parents of younger children, so the little ones on average, take about 12 to 18 months to be able to get that shift from concerns being raised or challenges being raised, difficulties being raised through to diagnosis. And it can take up to 8 consultations to get to that form of a confirmed diagnosis. Then we know that as children get older, it can even go even longer. So it may take 2.5 years from when, if you've got a child that's at 4 years of age that you're raising concerns around that time, then sometimes we're not seeing diagnoses through to 5 years later. And that's quite significant when we're thinking about what you've just mentioned, Jodi, those early supports and being able to put strategies in place so that everyone is thriving and ultimately the child is ensuring that they're leading a quality life that is giving them the best sense of access to services and supports as well. What we also know is that parents of older children, and particularly those parents who are sole caregivers, they've often been advised, to wait and see, and that wait and see notion is not particularly helpful. So there seems to be even more time between when those first concerns are raised and then a diagnosis. So there can be quite a significant gap. And that creates a lot of stress, of course, for families, because we have to be able to support families and support them as the advocates for their child. They know best. So I think if we're kind of saying, wait and see, it puts the onus back on the professional knowing the child best, and they may not.
Yes, you're right. And that it's so anxiety provoking, the wait and see approach. I understand it for certain aspects of our health and well-being when we go to the doctor and have those kinds of conversations. Sometimes there's nothing to be done immediately. But when it comes to things like this, like an autism diagnosis, and we do know our children so well, and that knowledge, that gut instinct that is often disregarded, I think, by some parents as not being really powerful. I think it's really important for us to remember that as parents, we do know our children. And so when we might go and have a conversation about anything with our doctor, that we are really brilliant advocates when we can recognise that we do have that in our arsenal as really powerful information, because whilst on the face of it, what you're observing might not seem out of the norm, I use in inverted commas, and the doctor might advocate for a wait and see approach, we know when there's change. And so I'd love for you to have that confidence to be able to share more of what you've seen and what you're observing, and keep that conversation going. The kinds of changes that parents might notice in their children that might ultimately be indicative of a future autism diagnosis. Is it okay for us to have a bit of a chat about what some of those things might be? It's like with anxiety, for example, we know physiologically there's so many signs and symptoms, but a racing heart and maybe sweating might not necessarily be linked to anxiety. It could be linked to a virus. And so there's no obviously diagnosing here on the podcast if you hear some symptoms, and just I think to have the idea that, all right, there's some things to look out for, and if you're noticing these things, it might be worth having a chat with your GP. Are there things that you're happy to share?
Sure, absolutely. And there's also a really wonderful app in this space called AS Detect, which is freely available and was developed here in Melbourne at La Trobe University at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre. And all the maternal child health nurses who have been trained around these early signs. So there is a large evidence base around this space and thinking about how we screen effectively and efficiently. And, we've come a long way, and in many respects, I would say Australia is leading the way with some of these aspects, which is wonderful to see. I think for families, it's always hard, especially if it's your first child. So when you don't have a second child or other children in the family, to have that kind of point of comparison around what is another form of, natural development there that would happen, and what would that look like? And so when there isn't that comparison point, it can be really difficult for parents to pick up what some of those early signs of autism would look like. So thinking about autism as a whole, it looks at social communication skills. When we're thinking about autism, we consider the social interaction skills and the way that the children communicate, as well as play development and relationships. So from that angle, in the very early years, we look at things like joint attention. So that's sharing attention to being engaged in something and sharing it from a sense of looking at the interest. But AS Detect is really great because it's got some video clips in it to actually show examples to families of what does it mean that when we're looking at this type of behaviour. Some of the others are looking at consistently socially engaging in smiling, or social smiling, which is that kind of consistent back and forth that you might engage in with someone that's familiar to you, or a child might engage with someone that's familiar. We also look at those early imitative behaviours, so mirroring or imitating people around you and engaging in that back and forth consistent eye gaze. So it's looking at using your eye gaze and your eye contact to get someone's attention or to direct someone's attention. and looking at things like responding to your name. And if the child's responding to their name or perhaps not responding to their name. And of course, with all of these features in those early years, it's important to rule out if there are any other explanations of these responses and behaviours. So often in the young years, we ensure that there's been hearing assessments that have gone through and that other professionals have checked to see whether something else might better explain.
Yes.
We also look at pretend play. So from a relationship perspective, just thinking about what's pretend play look like in those young children. So when we think about pretend play, we're considering, can they pick up and pretend to feed a teddy bear? Or are they able to engage in games like peekaboo or round and round the garden, or engage in some of those back and forth type of games with other children? Are they showing interest in other children? Or do they not prefer to be engaged with other children? So some of those early signs are also helpful. But there's a whole range of early signs to look at, and some of the other resources that are really useful for families to look into are the Raising Children Network is another great place to find more information. They've got a whole section on autism, right through from early years, early features, early signs, through to sleep strategies and what can you do to support a child who might be experiencing anxiety and be autistic themselves. So there's some really good information in there that talks through some of those early signs that I've just touched on today.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. The resources and references are excellent because there's such a sea of information online, and not all of it is to be trusted because anybody can have an experience with something and then start writing about it and share, their experience from that lens, but not necessarily be across what the science is saying and what trusted professionals like yourself would really want people to be reading and learning about autism through. So those resources will put in the show notes for anybody. I've got AS Detect and Raising Children Network, and I've got a feeling by the end of this conversation, the wonderful Dr. Rabba is going to share some others with us, and you can access those, of course, in the show notes on the very app you are listening to this podcast through.
Can I just also add to what you've said, Jodi, around information and sometimes the risk of information overload, and particularly around the period of diagnosis and the assessment phase as well. Families are vulnerable at this stage, and so it's really important that there are reputable and trusted sources of information for families to access. And there is so much online, which is great. There's some really great information. Like you said, there's also some information that's not so great. Also, listening to other peers that have gone through the process can be really helpful. So other parents is a useful source of information, listening to that lived experience. But one thing to note, and something that we often say, particularly in the autism world, is that when you've met one child with autism, we've met that one child.
Yes.
So that the autism spectrum is so broad that no autistic children are one and the same.
Yeah.
And it's so varied. So even if you're hearing different experiences from individuals, that's that individual story, and it hopefully can support you, but it may not be the same journey that you experience at all. So just being conscious of that is really helpful too.
That is really helpful. And it's a lesson to all of us that so many differences between people are experienced in very unique ways. And the same could be said for anxiety in the way it affects me. I can stand on a stage with a microphone and 3,000 people in front of me and record a podcast that goes out to the world, no problems. But other times when I've got kids who want to stick their fingers in the batter while I'm baking biscuits, it makes me really anxious because I start to think about what they're putting in the batter and just, some of the funny little idiosyncratic kind of habits that we pick up in the different ways anxiety presents, and social anxiety and phobias and separation anxiety and the like. So it's good. It's a really good reminder. And when it comes to autism, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So thank you. Thank you so much, Stacey. When it comes to the diagnosis, no doubt, people are going to respond really differently to the news of the diagnosis of autism for a child. What are some of the common experiences of parents following this diagnosis? Because they must vary, but it also can't be easy.
No, not at all. I think like with any news, people respond differently. and it's really important for me to acknowledge, I'm not a parent of autistic children. I'm a parent of children who have their own varying challenges, but they're not autistic. And I think it's always really key to listen to those families and listen to those voices so that we are paying attention to what's going on for these different families. And some parents might have really significant emotional responses to diagnosis. Others might feel quite challenged by their ability to manage that uncertainty post-diagnosis. And then there are parents that shift into that action mode. What can they do next, and channeling their inner resourcefulness and kind of getting on with, all right, let's move, let's get access to services, what do I need to do? But alongside this, though, there's also those parents who report a lot of difficulty with sharing the diagnosis with others. So we need to appreciate that many of these responses are governed by different beliefs and values, and cultural sensitivity comes into that, stigma, early life experiences, parents' own family of origin, and of course their current circumstances as well. So there's so much that comes into that post-diagnostic experience for a parent. So we need to be really sensitive to these factors when we're supporting families. And I think as a family and as a parent, it's important to be kind to yourself as well going through this process, and being conscious that there's not one right way to feel post a child's diagnosis. There's so many different ways that you might be feeling.
Yes, that compassion is so important, because the uncertainty drives a lot of anxiety around it, doesn't it? Will I be able to cope? What does this mean? What resources are available? How do I access them? How do I tell people? And I think really normalising that, depending on who you are, and like you say, all of those different variables is going to determine how you feel. But like anything, we're brilliant at adjusting, aren't we? We kind of have these moments in life where there feels like there's a bit of a turning point. But we do get used to these changes well, don't we, as humans? We're pretty resilient like that.
Absolutely. And, connecting with community members, with advocates, with other parents who are going through or who have already gone through these similar experiences is key at this time. And if I reflect on some of the parents that I've worked with, there's a really great quote, and I've got it here in front of me to share with you, from one of my families that I worked with about that period post-diagnosis. And I think it really resonates with that intolerance of uncertainty and that anxiety that comes with that we just mentioned. So if you're happy, I'll just share that with you. Please. And hopefully with the audience too. They can get a sense of experiencing this as well.
Please do.
So this is from one of my lovely families that I've worked with in the past, who I've really learnt a lot from as well, I must add.
Yes.
For me, it was the not knowing. Is my child going to have an intellectual disability? Is my child going to be able to speak? Is my child going to be able to attend school? At first, that's all I could think of. It just made me come up with 1,000 different questions that no one can answer because we don't know yet. Whereas now, a year and a bit later, we're just taking one step at a time. Let's deal with today.
That's beautiful. And it speaks to the experience of probably so many parents, those unknowns. And then just day by day, you're learning, you're researching, you're connecting with community, you're speaking with professionals, you're learning to understand your child better, which is such a gift. When we understand them and any differences that they might have, we can work together, we can work with them. Do you find that some families, it's a huge relief? It's kind of like, oh, yes, because having a diagnosis, once you have a formal diagnosis, that opens doors, I imagine, in terms of funding and resource access and the like. Am I right about that assumption?
Look, absolutely. There's different varying levels of supports and funding, and depending on the needs of the family, the needs of the child specifically, it can look very differently. But yes, for some families, that there is that sense of relief, particularly if they've been going through this process. We mentioned earlier, sometimes it can take 8-10 consultations or more. And if they're going to all these professionals and they've got that intuition, they've got that gut instinct that something is different about my kid and I need some help, but no one's listening, or I feel like I'm not being heard. And then finally they receive this diagnosis. You can imagine that, oh, there is that sense of validation.
Yes. Yeah, that validation must be very, very powerful, and a mixed bag of emotions. And as you said, that it's a different experience for different families, and especially because there is a genetic component to autism that I understand. And so we have parents who are perhaps autistic themselves and have grown up in a different time of understanding and support with autism, and so may have preconceived beliefs about, understandable beliefs about kind of what this diagnosis might mean, whereas it's a very different time for people with autism now, which is in a wonderful way. And so, yeah, so a really mixed bag. And I think just really normalising that is really powerful for people listening, because, you know, we don't want to be alone in our challenges, and we never are, but we just don't often have access to people who have been through similar challenges. How could families connect with other families who are going through this process of diagnosis, or who have already had a diagnosis for one of their children? Are there particular kind of groups that people can connect with that you could recommend or point people in the direction of?
Absolutely. So there are a few key bodies, particularly if we think here in Australia. We've got AMAZE, which is a peak body for autism in the state of Victoria, but they provide a range of different services nationwide. They've got Autism Connect, which is a great helpline for families to be able to connect with individuals on the other line who can direct them to different levels of support, different community organisations and peer support. There's also Different Journeys, which is based here in Victoria and connects a lot of carers, so a lot of parents, caregivers of autistic children, autistic adolescents, autistic adults even, and provides that space for connection, understanding. Often they create safe spaces in the community where families can come together and share their true experience of what's going on, and also what can be done, what can they do to get further support. There's also Aspect, Autism Spectrum Australia, which provides, again, a number of different resources and information. There's some great information there around self-compassion. They've been doing a lot of work around self-compassion, both for autistic people and then also thinking about parents and caregivers. And just coming back to the point we made earlier, compassion's really important at this time, and arguably throughout our lives, really.
Yes.
So there are a lot of resources available. Sometimes it's just about getting that first step over the line and making that connection.
Yes. I did some work for a group that I can't recall the name of at the moment. It was an event that brought together the families of hearing impaired children. And I went and had a talk with the parents about anxiety and their anxieties and their kids' anxiety, and it was a beautiful event to be a part of. And the joy, the way these kids connected with each other, the way the parents were able to chat, support, and it's a beautiful community. They have this overnight, I think it's maybe 2-night getaway once a year. They all come together, and it was just brilliant to see, and you could just tell that everybody just felt so supported, so connected, and the kids were absolutely thriving. And so it's when you can find the right community to support you, it just makes community in general is brilliant, but particularly when there are differences in the family that you're navigating, to have the people around you that understand, and you can have really proper, open, honest conversations about what you're experiencing and get support. It's really nice to have those support groups to direct parents to, so I'll put those in the show notes. Stacey, you've shared for us, we've talked about self-compassion, we've talked about these beautiful networks where parents can connect. What are some of the other ways parents can look after themselves as they're going through this process of diagnosis and just kind of getting to know how to best support their child who is either in the process of getting a diagnosis or already has a diagnosis of autism? How can they look after themselves? Because that's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's critical. We often come back to that analogy of the oxygen mask on the plane, and I think it's one that will never really get old, because it's so true. You know, if you don't put that oxygen mask over yourself first, you're not going to be able to help the child next to you. And the same goes here when we're thinking about life. You know, if the parent isn't supporting themselves or putting some energy into supporting themselves, they're not going to be the best parent they can be for their kid. They're not going to be able to provide those types of resources from their internal system. Their kind of internal emotional response is going to feel somewhat depleted. So it's going to be a challenge. We think about this even when we're talking about regulation and co-regulation with our young children. You know, we need to be in a good place so we can be able to co-regulate and support our children. So sources of support are really important. So whenever I'm trying to get a better understanding of this, I go back to the parents I've worked with and the parents that I'm still engaged with. And I like to listen to them and listen to the autistic community and hear about what is it that's worked and what is it that they have done that's actually been effective. And some of the key things that have been really helpful have been as simple as getting further education and knowledge around what autism is, what it looks like, getting a better understanding of what it looks like in the early years and then in the middle childhood and then adolescence and so on. And what are some of the things that we can understand to expect from autistic people? And so that can help to alleviate some of that intolerance of uncertainty, some of that anxiety that comes with not knowing. It still may not answer everything for their child because, as we've said before, every child's journey is unique, every family's journey is unique, but it can give some insight. We also know that professional support is really helpful. So having a trusted health professional, a trusted individual, whether that might be a psychologist, whether it may be a social worker, or whether it might be the pediatrician and the GP, having that trusted support to go to can be really useful, as well as self-care. And I think this self-care one is often really hard. I know when I was providing post-diagnostic support to families, I'd often hear the comment from individuals going, I just want to get on with it. Like, there's no time for me. I just need to get on with getting the supports and getting things into play.
Yes.
But taking those moments around caring for you are also really taking those moments for yourself are also key.
Yes.
They don't have to be a whole day out or a whole morning out. It's whatever works for you as a family, what's going to fit into your family structure. And it may be as simple as having a cup of tea for 10 minutes on your own, whether that's going into your room or sitting outside or going for a 5-minute walk around the block, or being the one to take the dog for a walk that night or that morning. Having those moments of self-care embedded within your routine at a feasible time, at a feasible way that works. And I'm not going to come in here and suggest one way that's going to fit, because there isn't a one way. It has to be unique to the individual. And then finally, the other piece of advice that families have shared is organising an action plan. And I think about that and I go, oh, actually, every day I have a to-do list. Every day I have an action plan. So if it's reflecting on what's useful in that kind of organising manner, then that type of action plan is also useful from an organisational lens, like just being able to have some things in place that can work.
And it gives that sense of control, doesn't it? Because when some things might seem so uncertain and out of control, it enables us to focus on what we can control and feel like, we're moving forward, we're accomplishing the action plan for the day and putting things into place. And on that action plan needs to be looking after yourself, because we parent for a lifetime. It's a marathon. It's a ultra marathon, not a sprint. And so if we burn out and we don't look after our own needs, it is only going to be detrimental on the whole to the family when we're not coping and we're not able to do the things that we need to do. And I did an episode with Kate Johnson, and she is a carer in her own family. And she also is a counsellor who was working with families with children with autism and ADHD and anxiety and mental health challenges and of varied types. And she said she found it very hard to find time for herself day to day, just with all of the things that needed to be accomplished in the day and other kids to look after as well, and work and the like. And she said that one of the things that she's found personally and also with her clients is those moments you talked about, that cup of tea, that small walk outside, even just taking your shoes off and walking on the grass. It might only be 5 minutes, but that's a recalibration. That's kind of like a really big reset. It's like you're running, you're resting, you're running, you're resting, or you're walking, you're resting. And those moments peppered throughout the day, even if it's sort of 4, 5 or 6 moments of a couple of minutes here, 5 minutes there, if that's all you can manage, it can actually make a really powerful difference, and it can sustain you. It also helps to get some extra help if that's needed by family, if you need a little bit more time out. But yeah, she really spoke at length about the power of those moments, and that when you are planning your day, that's got to be something that you think about. You can't keep putting yourself off the list, because eventually the only thing that will be on the list will be you, because your body will force you to take care of yourself. So really,
Absolutely.
really powerful suggestions there.
Yes, I totally agree with you there, Jodi. It's definitely thinking about, well, if we don't put this person first, which is ourselves more often than not, then there is that risk of burnout. And so looking at what is doable within our day-to-day is quite key. I think one of the other things, just to draw on that as well, is considering family wellbeing and family resilience. And when we think about that, particularly in that post-diagnostic period and even the sort of diagnostic journey, there's some key protective factors, including being able to have familial support or spousal support, which you just touched on there, and tapping into that where possible, but also thinking about self-efficacy. And that's a really key factor that we've seen even in the literature. It's shown us, like, parenting self-efficacy and how that plays a role. So having that belief in yourself as a parent and feeling confident in that role to be able to take those next steps. And I think that needs to come with that self-compassion. They kind of go hand in hand, because there's no rule book for parenting. I know there's a lot of books out there, but there's not one rule book. There's not the manual of parenting that we go to.
Yeah.
It's learning on the job a lot of the time. It's trial and error. And then when you have a child that's got additional needs, that is autistic, that has a different way of thinking and a different way of engaging with the world, then we have to shift our expectations as well and consider it in that way. So I think that's really important too.
The protective factors are really important too. And if you are not in a place where you have a lot of help around you as a parent or a carer listening, Stacey, what would you recommend, just as a final question before I ask you how people can learn more about your work and even connect with the work that you do from a clinical standpoint and a research standpoint? If a person feels a bit kind of on their own with a diagnosis of a child in their life as a carer or a parent around autism, what would be the first thing that you would recommend that they do? Where could they connect first to try to see about maybe getting some more support for themselves or within the family home?
I think when you're thinking about some of those aspects, looking at internally within the family home, what supports are there? So within that family unit, the spouse, whether there's other siblings, family members there, that's probably a really good starting point. And then beyond that, if there's not those family networks, coming back to those trusted health professionals and individuals in the external community. Is there capacity to engage with some of the other parents that are in your network, whether that's at the mother's group that you've been engaged in, or going through your maternal and child health nurse and asking about connecting with other families, or your GP and connecting with others in a similar situation. But then also those other peak bodies that I mentioned earlier, like Amaze, like Different Journeys, whose role is really connecting people in the autism community and ensuring that there are different supports that can be accessed easily as well. One of the other things that's also come up in the literature is looking at different ways of coping, and different aspects of coping can be really helpful. One of the other things that's come up in the literature when we're thinking about different ways of coping is spiritual coping,
Yes.
or tapping into sort of spirituality. And that can be from a religious angle, or it might be from a different mindfulness, meditation perspective. So those areas I think are also quite interesting when we think about what is it that gives us a sense of hope for the future and gives us a sense of a positive outlook for the future. So connecting yourself with people who have those types of values can be useful, and steering away from individuals who may not be providing that level of support. And I've heard this from many families before, where that sharing the diagnosis can be really difficult because they're not getting that support from their family network. They're having different perceptions that are coming through, and it's really jarring and really unhelpful. So you want to be connecting with people who are going to be lifting you up, who are going to be supporting you. So you're moving in a direction that is more supportive into the future, that is more optimistic, that is kind of looking towards flourishing and thriving with the resources and supports that are at your fingertips.
Oh, beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you so much. How can listeners connect with your work from, I guess, it's very exciting because I know you've just published another research paper. So congratulations to you for your incredible work in the research into autism and the way it impacts people and families. How can people connect with your academic work, but also your clinical work? And you, of course.
Sure. Thanks, Jodi. So I am pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm always willing to have a chat and really welcome people to connect, whether that's through LinkedIn, through Instagram, I'm also on there, but also through my research page on Monash University. That's also got my details and my email address. So happy for people to reach out and connect. And we're all learning in this process. So I think I always just like finishing with that because it's such an area that's evolving over time. We don't just recently, the stats this year are 1 in 40 individuals have been looked at in terms of the prevalence rates of autism. So I think, another 5 years, another 10 years, there's going to be new research, new evidence, and we're learning so much from the autism community and the autistic people themselves. So, I'm always open to people reaching out, whether it's from a research angle or if they're looking for different sources of support. I'm happy to try and connect you with those types of avenues as well.
Oh, thank you. And the clinical work that you do with families, if there are Melbourne listeners, I presume it's in person?
Yeah, so there is some family work that I'm still engaged with. A lot of that primarily is through my public health role at Monash Health. So that's where I'm working more so with adolescents and adults now. But I do have a few PhD candidates who are doing some more work in this space as well. So it's still an area that we're trying to grow.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. You have such a beautiful heart for it and a beautiful brain for it. And you've just shared so openly with us and with such expertise. I know if I were walking in the shoes of a parent on this journey of diagnosis that I would find this conversation really, I'd learn a lot about the process, really comforting and would give me a lot of hope. And that's what I always hope for these episodes, is that people have more understanding, more skills, or at least are pointed in the direction of where they can upskill and learn more, and that you feel less alone, you feel more optimistic. And I think we've done all of that for people today. So I'm very, very grateful for your time.
Thank you, Jodi. And thank you for your openness and kindness throughout this process. I think it's really great to get this messaging out there so we can support more families and individuals on this journey.
Definitely. And we are both Monash alumni. So we've got that in common, which is lovely.
Great. Small world.
Totally. So thanks again, Dr. Stacey Rabba. And thank you for listening. Please share this episode with anyone who you think might really benefit from this particular conversation. And reviews on the podcast are always welcome. And I really appreciate your time and your connection with me in this community. And I really look forward to bringing you another very interesting and insightful episode next week. Okay, take care of you, won't you? Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.